Welcome to another episode at G.E.N Talks, hosted by me, Melissa,
and me, Desiree,
where the goal is to empower the youth of Glendale and connect youth to community resources, individuals, and organizations through interviews and discussions.
And today we are joined by special guest Molly Stevens. Molly is an award-winning cookbook author, cooking instructor, and recipe developer. Her cookbooks include All About Dinner, Simple Meals, Expert Advice, All About Roasting, and All About Braising. Her recipes and articles have appeared in Food and Wine, Bon Appetit, Fine Cooking, Eating Well, Everyday with Rachel, and other national publications. She has been named Cooking Teacher of the Year by both the International Association of Culinary Professionals and Bon Appetit. Molly is the co-host of the Everything Cookbooks podcast.
Don't forget to follow us on our socials on Facebook and Instagram at MyGlendaleLAC. Don't forget to also listen to us on Spotify or Apple or wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Glendale Library Arts and Culture, where we give out full episodes every Friday at 4:30 p.m. Thank you, Molly, for taking the time every day to talk with us. We have a lot to discuss.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So you were born and raised in Buffalo, NY, and you came from a large family who loves to gather around a table. What was your earliest memory that captivated you to fall in love with food in general?
Wow, earliest memory. It's just where my family always comes together and still comes together. And, we joke that we're the kind of family that you don't get up from one meal until you know what you're doing for the next one, and we tend to be very busy people. And so it would be just where you take a moment to sit down, usually dinner time obviously is the biggest meal, but still it was, breakfast and lunch. And so it wasn't so much the food itself that I do remember some specific dishes and foods that we loved, but it was more just being around the table together, passing plates, talking about the day. And there was always, I remember, especially like in high school, there was always extra people at the table. I had 3 siblings and both my parents were around then, and there'd invariably be an extra seat at the table for a cousin or a neighbor or a exchange student or just somebody, and so it just felt like it was bigger than just us.
Do you remember the first recipe that you ever made?
I remember my mom teaching me how to make hollandaise sauce.
Okay.
Which was kind of funny because that seemed really fancy compared to what we normally ate. So, but I think, what hollandaise is, it's like an egg and butter based sauce that you put over eggs Benedict or asparagus is really good with it. And I think the alchemy of that, it was like magic, that you take butter and eggs, egg yolks and lemon and turn it into this. And it was hard too, because you could go wrong, it could break. And so that was really, I really remember that. And I think I was pretty young then, but then I remember the first dish that I started making by myself, and I would have these I'd cook it for my friends, and it was just this chicken casserole. And it was I grew up in the 70s, so it was made with canned soup. And it's embarrassing to think about now, but a friend of mine actually found the recipe that I wrote down and gave to her. So actually, that would be the first recipe I ever wrote too. So it's a couple cans of soup and some chicken and frozen broccoli. It was just this idea that I could make something and serve it to my friends was a big deal.
And in your early 20s, you moved to France to pursue your dream of living a life dedicated to food and cooking. How did you decide that the timing was right, and what was your experience like living abroad?
It was it was hard living abroad, and I decided the time was right. I had gone to college and studied English literature, which I loved. I loved being in school and I loved studying, but I didn't really know. And I always had jobs because I feel like I had a pretty strong work ethic, and I like to work. I like to make things. I like to be of use. But I didn't know what I was supposed to get a career, and I didn't know how to get a career. I was 21 years old, and I didn't want to do I didn't want to be a lawyer, or I don't have a science background, so I wasn't going to be a doctor, and I didn't want to go to advertising. It just seemed like there were all these, I didn't know what to do. But the whole time I was working in restaurants because I needed to work, and you could get you could get a job in a restaurant. And I'd been working in restaurants sort of after school and on weekends. But again, this was a long time ago when restaurants weren't a super I mean, my parents weren't thrilled about me going into the restaurant business because that seemed like something that somebody with an education might not do. And I couldn't articulate what, I mean, I wasn't into fine dining. I just liked being in restaurant kitchens and chopping and moving pots and pans. And so I kind of went to France to Europe to run away.
Oh,
So
okay.
nobody could ask me what I was going to do in a way. And I wanted a big adventure, and I was really fortunate in that, you know, I had the family support. I mean, my father lent me some money to go, and I went over there. And when I got over there, I discovered that food could be a whole life. You know, you could dedicate yourself to food, and especially in France. And suddenly, what I thought was something I was just going to have to get out of my system became everything to me, and I never looked back. Food was all I wanted to do after that.
So I think you touched a little bit upon this, but what is something that you've learned during your stay that is in France that has stuck with you?
You know, I think the thing I learned is that I was never going to be a great chef. I love cooking. I still cook every day, and you know, we'll talk about what I do now in food. But I worked alongside when I was over there. I got to work alongside some really amazing chefs, and I had worked with some pretty great chefs before I even left. But they were so focused, and so they were just single focused on what they did. And I had all these other interests, and being in the restaurant business, I also saw it, you know, you're working nights and weekends. You're working holidays. It's a really singular profession. And I saw myself, one, not being, I didn't feel like I had what it took to just really be a chef. I had all these other things I wanted to do. And what I learned is that the best chefs that I was working with were the best teachers, and they were the best mentors. And that in order to be, and that was one aspect of being a good chef, that I was like, I could do that. I could be a teacher and a mentor. And that I was, you know, I had enough knowledge to do that. And then so that's what I realized, is that teaching and mentoring could be a part of what I do instead of just cooking.
Back to the States, you started to work at the French Culinary Institute in New York City. How did this opportunity come to be?
When I was over in France, I met someone. I tried as much as I could to like collect contacts, you know, to try to just figure out how, you know, what was going to come next. And I met someone over there she was over there looking for someone to help run the school she just opened. It was just a chance meeting, and I was working at a cooking school in France. It was like this bilingual cooking school. So it was for American English speaking students in France. And so this woman had come from New York over there and I'm not even sure why she was there, how we even met, but I met her and I just decided that's what I wanted to do. And so I kind of pursued it, and I got the opportunity. And I'd been over there for almost 3 years, and I missed my family, and I didn't have papers to stay, and I wasn't going to ever stay forever. And so it just seemed like a great opportunity to move. And New York is, you know, close enough to home that it seemed like a reasonable thing to do. So I did it. I said yes. It was a point in my life. I mean, you guys must appreciate this, where I just said yes to as much as I could say yes to, because I was just looking for things to happen.
I guess would that be like a piece of advice that you would say, to say yes more and not to, like, I guess, say no to certain opportunities, I guess?
I mean, it's certainly I think saying yes is it's a really important way to grow. And I said yes to things that, you know, were scary and I mean, not scary in an unsafe way, but challenged my confidence and I always felt like I was, what do you call, you know, out of my league, you know, I was reaching over my head, but I'd say yes. And then I'd go, okay, I got to figure out how to, you know, sink or swim kind of thing. You know, within reason, but yeah, to really, and to be open to opportunities too, especially. So saying yes is rising to challenges, but also something that you might not know, you might not think, I don't know if that's for me. I mean, if you definitely know it's not for you, then say no. But if you think, I don't know, there might be something there, to say yes. And it's been a huge piece of of my journey.
So you also have cooking classes and events. How do you prepare for those cooking classes?
Oh, actually, I have one coming up next week, so which is great because obviously over the past couple of years, haven't had as many of them. And we've done a few virtual ones, which aren't nearly as fun. I've had a lot of people say, "Oh, you should do TV," and I don't. I like the immediacy of being together with people. I mean, it kind of goes back to what I was saying before. So it depends on the. There are two ways to do cooking classes or events. Some of them are hands-on, where it's a smaller group of people and everybody gets to cook, and then some of them are demonstration, where it's me standing in front of a large group of people demonstrating how to make the dishes, and then everybody gets a taste at the end. They're both super fun, and I like to do them both, but the hands-on is really, I think, probably more fun in a way because everybody gets to get involved. So for this one that's coming up, it's a small space, and I think they're 12 or 16, and so I'll, obviously get all the ingredients. I have all the recipes prepared, and I map out, how it's going to be organized. And then I do little demonstrations of the recipe and sort of give people guidelines of what to do. And then everybody starts cooking. And then it's complete mayhem. It's super fun. And then I circulate around and just check in. And then, we'll come back and say we're doing a pasta. I'll show them how to make the noodles. Everybody goes and makes the noodles, and then we come back and then we'll talk about how to make the sauce. And then, so you sort of let it go and then rein it back in and let it go. And then what I love to do is if we can all sit down at the end and eat together and sort of talk about how it all went. So, yeah.
I love that. And you began your teaching career at New England Culinary Institute. What is your favorite part of teaching?
Oh, wow. My favorite part of teaching. It's just seeing somebody get it, or seeing somebody get excited, or, hearing from someone years later that you didn't know even was listening, that pays attention, or that, takes something away from it. It's especially in culinary education. I learned so much, and it's technical. It's like vocational school, right? And I learned so much about learning styles and how everybody learns differently. And so I would say the greatest part about teaching is that I'm always learning, because any good teacher is studying before you start teaching, or doing research, or trying to bring something fresh to the subject matter. And so teaching, even for this class that's coming up, I'll go and research whatever it is, have a little bit of something new to add to it, because there's always something to learn.
So in 2022, you started the Everything Cookbooks podcast along with 3 other veteran cookbook authors. What made you decide to create a podcast?
So this is a group, there are 4 of us, as you mentioned, 3 other women colleagues, and we have been meeting. 2 are on the West Coast. I'm on the East Coast with another one, but we all live, we don't live anywhere near each other. And we have been meeting for like 5 or 6 years, once a month, just as a sort of professional support group is what it started as. Because when, I'm a freelance, my career is freelance. I don't have, I don't have a boss. I have many bosses. I work for a lot of different people, but, and being an author can be a very solitary existence. So you spend a lot of time by yourself. And sometimes when you're doing freelance work and writing work, it gets a little lonely. It gets a little, isolating. And so the group of us started just a regular, once a month, we would just get together on something like this, a screen. And it was even before Zoom. We were doing it over Google Meet or something. And we would just once a month get together. And sometimes we would just talk about what's happening in our business, or maybe somebody had a job offer that they weren't sure if it sounded like a good deal. Gossip a little bit, whatever was going on. And over the years, we got to be friends, and it just became a really important part of my life. And last August, it wasn't me, one of them said, this could be a podcast, because we were just talking about, we're all write cookbooks, and we were just talking about something about cookbooks, whether it was like a trend or, Kristen Donnelly, one of the women, had done a podcast herself. And so she was sort of more tuned in. And so we got thinking, maybe we should make this a podcast. And the thing I love about it is, and it could be coming off of 2 years of isolation or whatever, but it really feels, what we're doing in this podcast is we are talking about how cookbooks get made. And so we're doing it in a very spirit of generosity and sharing, and publishing can be very obtuse, and like it's hard to know for someone breaking into it, like how do you do it? How do you get a book made? And so it's just been really fun to kind of put it all out there. And I think of all the people that helped me when I was starting out, and it's just nice to be able to have a format where we can just put this information and people looking for it can find it.
So from your first cookbook, New England, to your most recent cookbook, All About Dinner, Simple Meals, Expert Advice, how have you seen the way you tackle each of these cookbook projects change?
That's a really good question, Desiree. So the New England book was what they call a work for hire, which means I don't own the rights to it. Like, it was part of this Williams Sonoma and another publisher. They commissioned the book, so they hired me to write it, and then they own all the intellectual property or the copyright to it, and they paid me. It was just like a job. But it was my first book. It was the first time I got my name on the cover of a cookbook, so it was a huge opportunity. So it was very much in collaboration with them. It was what they call right to fit. Like, every recipe had to fit on one page. Like, that was it. So that's a very restrictive way to write a recipe. So it was just different, but it was a great opportunity. But so then I was fortunate enough to get into writing solo books, and I've written 3 big solo books. And my first book was called All About Braising, and then All About Roasting. So those are 2 like really technique-based books, and they're me going hardcore into teaching. Like, if you learn this technique, then you can do it without a recipe. You can just we could talk about how cookbooks are sort of the challenge of cookbooks. Anyway, so those are really technical books, and they were really me coming off my teaching career. And then the last book, which came out right in 2019, All About Dinner, is my most personal book. And I think it's taken me this many years to feel that sharing my personal recipes was sort of okay. They're not okay, but I just wanted to put that out there. So it is my most personal book and my least technique-driven book. So it's sort of been an arc, I would say, career-wise, yeah.
So how do you gather your recipes or know what recipes to put in your cookbook?
That is a very good question. So when I start a book project, it's like an outline. It's a combination between an outline, as if you were doing it for a term paper, and a business plan. They're kind of both things. It's a business plan in that you need to talk about how the book's going to sell, because it's the publisher is investing to make this thing that's going to sell. So you have to talk about the marketplace and what are the comparable books out there and who's going to buy the book and that sort of stuff. But then the outline part is where you talk about what the book's about, what's the theme, what's the mission, and then what are the recipes. And it's really, I write a whole table of content. And so when I do it, I'm looking for balance of, if it's a book if it's vegetables, meats, fish, you want to balance so it's not all chicken, it's not all shrimp, it's not, if it's a vegetarian book, you want to balance so it's not all broccoli and not all, you want some balance. I look for a balance of hard and easy recipes, complex and accessible, and it really, I guess a better answer to the question is you first start by figuring out who your audience is, who you're writing for, and then try to figure out what the recipes that those users or, readers, cooks are going to want. And are you trying to meet them where they are? Are you trying to get them to come up to a certain level? What are you trying to do with the recipes? So I think of it as a house of cards, like, because, you put too much of one thing, it inevitably falls down halfway through and you start all over again.
And so then I guess, how long does that process take for you creating and finishing a cookbook?
I'm very slow.
Oh.
I am a very slow cookbook creator. And if, I'm slow for a couple reasons. One, my books tend to be kind of big. But I do a number of other things besides write books. You know, I teach and I write for magazines and I do consulting work and things because that's sort of the nature of being a freelancer. It's this, you know, jigsaw puzzle of a career. But I like to take that time to put together a book. So I take anywhere from 3 to, I think I took 5 years on my second book. But I mean, some people, and if you, I hope you talk to some other cookbook authors, and they might say they do it in 6 to 12 months, which I think is probably more average. So it's kind of all over the place. But when you write a cookbook, it takes, once you turn it in, it takes about a year before it comes out too, because of all the editing and all the production that goes into it. So it's a slow process.
I also want to touch upon the your freelancing journey. How do you network to get these opportunities? And I guess because you did touch upon it when you were talking about your stay in France, how you had to like meet new people. So how did you even also meet new people in a new setting? Was that hard for you?
Yes, it's very hard. And I think, you know, a lot of writers tend to be introverted too. So it's like, it's hard, you know, but again, it goes back to the saying yes thing and taking on assignments. If you get them, or asking for assignments, you know, pitching is really hard. And then the 3 things that I used to say, and I think are still true, that in order to sort of succeed or move ahead is you need to turn your work in on time with freelance work. If you need to meet your deadlines, the work, you need to be, you know, what I like to say, don't be a jerk, but but be nice to work with, you know, not bring a whole lot of, just be pleasant if as much as you can. I mean, without, and I, you know, I'm careful to say this, especially to, you know, you 2 young women. I'm not saying, you know, just smile and not stand up for yourself, but just be a professional, you know, person to deal with and not a pain. And it sounds obvious, but it you know, meet your deadlines and be professional. And then the third thing, which I find, is to make sure your work is sound, you know, like, you know, that it's not, you're not turning in junk, like make sure you proofread it, make sure. So, you know, those first assignments, I just worked so hard on, because I knew that, you know, if you do well on one, chances are you'll get another. If you do those things, you meet your deadline, you're professional, and your work isn't terrible, you're probably going to get another opportunity, you know? And so that's what it took, was just trying to do that. And then, you know, I would find a way to get to conferences, I mean, that's how I met this group that we're podcasting with, through going to conferences. Sometimes it, you know, would take volunteering to get there, whatever it took. And if an author, I mean, depending on whatever field you're interested in, if it's writing, in my case, if an author comes to town, try to meet them. You know, I had some cookbook authors come to the school I was teaching in, and I volunteered to help them do their classes, you know, do their events, just so I could find out who they are, meet them.
Is there one recipe that you would recommend for someone who is beginning to cook?
Well, first I'd say, what do you like to eat? Because the one recipe has to be, I think the first thing is to identify what you like to eat. And then, you know, if you eat meat, if you're a vegetarian, if you're, you know, but I like to, so like risotto, I think is a wonderful thing to make and to eat. And what I say is, find something you like to eat and then make it as many times as you can. Like, not every single day in a row, but like try to make it, you know, once a week for a month, or, you know, twice a week and until you can make it without looking at the recipe. And then you can take that and launch into other things, because every recipe teaches some technique. You learn something every time you cook something. And so once you start to cook without recipes, and that's why I said cookbooks are kind of a contradiction, because once you learn how to cook, you don't really need the recipe. You know, you're cooking without recipes, yet we need recipes to learn how to cook. So so that's what I recommend, is finding, you know, pick 2 or 3 things that you really love and just commit to learning how to make them.
And is there an ingredient that you tend to use a lot in your recipes?
Yes. Besides salt, I tend to love salt. I'm a very salty cook. So, but I would, I mean, olive oil certainly, and I don't even call that an ingredient. It's a pantry item, but I tend to go through a lot of olive oil. But I really, right now, I'm really on a kick with like briny, sort of tart things like preserved lemons, kimchi, olives, fish sauce. I just sort of really into that, and I think might be I'm cooking, less meat, aren't we all, right? And so those things help add a whole, a lot of punch to your food.
What do you hope people feel and say when they look at your cookbooks or try your recipes?
Joy, happiness, yeah. Yeah, I want people. For me, the greatest thing is if somebody cooks something, one of my recipes, and they serve it to themselves or to friends or family or loved one, and they're proud of it, and it worked. Because making a recipe is an investment, right? It's time, it's ingredients, it's in many cases, maybe you invited someone, to share it with you, and I really respect that. I mean, I take that seriously. Somebody is, if you read a poem you don't like, turn the page, read the next poem, or you read a short story, but to take the time to actually cook something that you want it to be like, wow, that was good. That, that made me happy. I want to make that again or something. Or if you're trying to impress somebody and you cook for someone and they're like, oh my gosh, you're such a good cook.
So before we end, we have some rapid fire questions to ask you. The first question is, what is your favorite color?
What is my favorite color? Green.
When are you the happiest?
When I'm around a table with people I love.
Knowing what you know now, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self?
To be a little happier. Yeah, to lighten up a little bit.
If you could have 3 people dead or alive for dinner, who would it be?
Oh gosh, I think it would probably be, this is such a hard one. I think I'm feeling a little sentimental right now, so I think it would be my parents. Yeah, I think it would be just people in and friends that are no longer around.
What do you want your legacy to be?
Well, that's a good one. I guess being of use, being of service, offering a hand.
What is your favorite movie?
It's Groundhog Day.
What is a book that you have recently read or are currently reading that you would recommend?
I just recently finished Crying in Mart.
Oh, okay.
And it's a book. Michelle Zauner is the author. It's a memoir. I sort of go between fiction and memoir, nonfiction, but it's a beautiful book. She's actually a musician. She's a musician behind Japanese Breakfast is the name of her band, but it's a memoir about losing her mom when she was 25 and her mom got sick, and Crying in Mart is her story of how she dealt with her grief through food, through learning how to cook the Korean recipes for her mom. And it's just beautifully written, and the way she writes about food it's a very powerful, and well, I hold it up, but I share books with friends, and so I pass it along to another friend, but I can't recommend it enough, and I'll probably read it again when I get it back from my friend.
Well, thank you so much, Molly. We learned a lot about you. Thank you for taking your time out of your day to sit down with us and talk. Can you let everyone at home know about any upcoming projects and where they could connect with you?
Sure. I think the podcast is probably the most, recent thing that's happening. And that is called, as you said, it's Everything Cookbooks. And you can find it at Everything Cookbooks. We have a website and all of that. And my website is just mollystevenscooks.com. So you can also find out what I'm up to there. And I wish we had time. I'd like to ask you guys questions about what you're up to. So it's about one-sided, but it was super fun to chat with you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again. We really appreciate you being here and doing this. And thank you so much.
Thanks. I appreciate you guys. All right. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.